The film opens with Matt and Larissa, a happy couple, moving into a new neighborhood. On their shifting day, Larissa and Matt catch their neighbor Anne, a week-old woman, peeking through the window, so they wave at her, but she closes the curtains, giving them an unwelcoming vibe. Ignoring Anne, Matt encourages Larissa to start playing piano because she hasn't played it ever since she's been pregnant. That day, Larissa surprises her husband and plays a decent melody on her piano. The following evening, Larissa feels heavy pressure on her stomach when her baby boy kicks inside the womb. She cannot help but scream in joy, which grabs Matt's attention. Matt runs to Larissa, who is in their newly set up child's nursery. There, Larissa shares her doubts about having a baby. Matt, without a single doubt, assures that they're doing the right thing, and they shouldn't be having second thoughts now that the baby is on the way. That night, the two end up having intercourse. Moments later, Larissa calls her sister Jessica to gossip about having this stage of her pregnancy, which is taken awkwardly by Jessica. The next morning, Matt surprises his wife by presenting her breakfast on the bed, alongside a perfectly plucked rose which he claims to have stolen from the neighbor's yard. Before leaving for work, Matt's father joins him outside his house. He greets his father, who happens to be an old police officer. His father opens his car trunk that's full of gifts for his grandson. Matt becomes emotional seeing the gifts, and indirectly projects his fear and doubtfulness to welcome his son by over-smiling and saying his life will change a lot after his son comes into this world. His father doesn't take the hint and adds that his entire life will be changed, which makes Matt more nervous. Following the conversation with his father, he goes to the office where a young intern named Carol offers him freshly bought coffee. The moment he enters his office, Matt, being more than thankful, mentions to Carol that she doesn't have to do this every day, but she smiles and walks away. Back at the new home, Larissa starts her day by stepping outside to pick up mail from her mailbox. There, she comes across her next-door neighbor Anne, who has no intentions of striking up a conversation with her. However, Larissa still carries a one-sided conversation and talks to Anne about her pregnancy being 4 weeks due. At the exact moment she announces her pregnancy to Anne, she falls on the floor in pain and starts bleeding from her lady bits. She yells at Anne to call 911, but Anne becomes confused and doesn't act upon it. The scenes then cut to the hospital where, in Matt's presence, the doctors perform a complicated surgery on Larissa. By the end of the operation, the doctor nods and delivers the grieving news to Matt about not being able to save their son. The doctor also reveals to Matt that Larissa clinically perished for a minute during the surgery, which may change her behavior. The following day, Matt greets Larissa when she regains consciousness. Things hit a downward spiral in Matt's life when he greets a whole new Larissa who is cold and emotionless. She shows no kindness to Matt and demands to see her son's body. She gives Matt the side eyes when he mistakenly uses the word "it" to describe their deceased son. When she repeats her wish to see her son, Matt goes to the hospital's chapel and gets Father Lopez to see Larissa and pray for the loss of their baby. When Larissa sees Matt bringing Father Lopez instead of their son, she avoids the priest and the prayers and gives Matt a cold look, which makes him take Larissa to the morgue house to see their son's body. Matt becomes heartbroken to revisit their son's body, whereas Larissa looks at the body without showing a single emotion and leaves the morgue before Father Lopez says his prayers. Matt apologizes to Lopez and goes after Larissa. Left behind, Father Lopez says his prayers alone and sprinkles holy water on the baby. The following night, Larissa has a lucid dream in which she gets up from her bed and walks to the morgue house, where she finds her baby alive and crying. She snaps out of her dream screaming and shouting, which wakes up Matt, who is sleeping on a couch by Larissa's side. This event causes the two to visit a counselor who prescribes some heavy-dosed pills to Larissa, so she stays woozy and sleepy during her grieving period and instructs Matt to visit every week. Not approving this idea, Larissa bluntly replies that the visiting sessions won't bring her son back to life. Besides that, she also yells at the doctor for never being able to comprehend what she saw when she perished for a minute. Following this, Matt brings Larissa home, thinking she will heal faster there, but little does he know what awaits the grieving wife. Before entering their home, Matt asks Larissa about what she did when she lost her life, but Larissa makes excuses and pretends to have forgotten what she saw. Upon Larissa's first night at home after losing the baby, Larissa has trouble sleeping, so she walks to her son's nursery, where she holds the teddy bear that was to be her child's first toy. As she's looking around the room, she looks out of the window and finds a wheelchair-bound woman staring at her from the adjacent window, which happens to be on Anne's second story. She becomes uncomfortable being stared at, so she goes back to sleeping in her room. Larissa wakes up the next day and starts an argument with Matt when he apologizes for leaving for work, instead of staying with her. Larissa not only argues, but also blames Matt for the miscarriage, because he insinuated the night before she miscarried her son. She also accuses Matt of not being as traumatized as her, since he's able to sleep at night whereas she isn't. Matt walks out of the home and goes to work, since he cannot let his frustrations out on Larissa because of what she's going through. Instead, he returns the baby presents to his dad and misbehaves with Carol at work. Back at the house, Larissa picks up mail and gets approached by another neighbor named Ruth, who is much more welcoming than Anne. Larissa also feels a bit lighthearted while talking to Ruth. Before Ruth leaves with her dog, Larissa asks about Anne and if she has a daughter. Ruth nods and tells Larissa that the old woman has a daughter who's been sitting by the second-story window for years. Ruth claims that at first, she was very uncomfortable with having Anne's girl stare through the windows 24/7, but eventually, she got used to it. When Ruth leaves, Larissa sees Anne's daughter staring at her from her windows, whereas she wasn't there when Ruth looked at the window before. Larissa goes back home and hears the cries of a baby, so she runs upstairs to her baby's nursery, where she finds her son alive and crying inside the baby crib. When she picks up the baby, she snaps out of her illusion and finds herself holding her late baby's teddy bear. As she looks outside the windows, she finds Anne's daughter peeking at her again, so she closes the curtains immediately. Shattered by what she just experienced, Larissa is forced to search for Anne's mysterious daughter online. She finds an Italian published article online, according to which the existence of Anne's daughter was never revealed to the public, and her husband was arrested for being involved in satanic rituals. She feels sick after reading the news article, so she decides to rest for a while. Instead of getting rest, she becomes paranoid when she cannot make the crying of her late son go away. She finally grabs her medicine and tosses a pill down her throat to calm herself down. That day, Matt resists contacting Larissa from work and comes home late. He takes a quick shower and goes to bed, where Larissa claims to see her son well and alive in the crib. She also breaks into tears and wishes to exchange circumstances with her son, but Matt gives her emotional support like the good husband he is. When he realizes Larissa has gone soft and emotional, he seizes the opportunity to ask her about what she saw when she perished. Larissa opens up about her being dragged down by a mysterious entity into wild flames. Matt gives Larissa full attention and makes sure she feels seen and heard. That night, Matt goes to sleep, but Larissa has trouble sleeping. She ends up finding peace in her son's nursery, where she sits on a rocking chair and sings lullaby to the teddy bear, thinking it's her son. In the next scene, Anne's house is shown for the first time. Her entire house is lit with candles around her daughter's photo frames, indicating she is no longer around. Anne pours herself some tea after dinner. For some strange reason, she looks at the ceiling and throws her dinner set on the floor, causing it to shatter into pieces. She wants to scream at the top of her lungs, but she places her hands in front of her mouth and resists screaming as if she fears being heard by her late daughter. Meanwhile, on Matt and Larissa's side, Larissa wakes up in a good mood and pampers Matt before going to work. She promises to bake him his favorite chocolate cake when he comes back from work, and refers to him as her guardian angel, which is more than enough to make Matt's day. Unfortunately, things turn out to be the opposite when Matt leaves. Larissa goes to the kitchen to prepare the cake. She ends up seeing the reflection of Anne's daughter in the oven's glass panel, standing right behind her with evil eyes. Before Larissa can process that, she starts hearing the crying sounds of her baby and runs upstairs to the nursery, where she doesn't find her son. This triggers a manic episode for Larissa, and she ends up jumping out while Anne's daughter stares at her from her window. Luckily, Ruth is passing by, so she ends up calling the ambulance. The scene cuts to the hospital, where the doctor asks Matt if Larissa had any similar incidents in the past. Matt recalls how Larissa tried to take when her father passed away. This was when she was only 16. The doctor begins to understand Larissa's coping mechanism to trauma and tells Matt to go home and get some sleep while they keep Larissa at the hospital overnight. Before Matt leaves, the doctor prescribes more medicine to keep Larissa's nerves calm. Matt then ends up revisiting Father Lopez in the hospital's chapel and hesitantly invites him over to his place to check if Larissa is possessed or not, because Matt finds her behavior strange and changed. Father Lopez agrees to come over at his place by 4 in the afternoon. Later, Father Lopez sits down with Matt and prays alongside him. But then scene cuts to Anne, who is also praying to God and asking for forgiveness. The next day, Matt brings Larissa home, who happens to be in a better mood. When she goes to bed, Father Lopez makes his entrance. Matt reevaluates his thoughts on Larissa and tells Lopez to leave, since it was wrong of him to think his wife was possessed. Larissa also catches Matt talking to Lopez on the doorstep, which makes Matt nervous. Lopez keeps insisting upon checking Larissa, since he believes possessions can be of different kinds, but Larissa isn't in the mood to be interrogated. When Lopez asks some questions related to hell and the devil, Larissa makes some upsetting statements, so Matt is forced to close the door on Lopez. When Lopez walks back to his car, he sees Anne, who is horrified while looking at him. Anne runs back to her home and punishes by using a depiction of Jesus to She lies on the ground on her stomach and spreads her arms, similar to the way Jesus' arms were spread while he was on a cross. Matt is shown talking to Larissa's sister, Jessica, on a video call. He is talking to Jessica since Larissa has stopped responding to her ever since the miscarriage. Now, Jessica suggests seeing a friend of her friend, who can help with Larissa's condition, because said person works with people who are on the brink of passing and helps them cross over with the spirits of their loved ones. Matt doesn't find this suggestion rational, but Jessica insists on letting her help them since Larissa's condition is worsening. Subsequently, Jessica takes a flight to Larissa's town and insists Matt to not be picked up at the airport. She makes her way to their house by cab and jumps in Larissa's bed to snuggle with her. She then takes her straight to Pedro Salazar, who immediately diagnoses Larissa's problem. When he sits Larissa and Jessica down in an open field, he senses a spirit lingering around her. Larissa thinks it's her son's spirit, but Pedro claims that his son's spirit is harmless and is only waiting for his mother to let go of him so he can transition to the next phase. Whereas the spirit that's lingering around her is way more determined and powerful and has not left the earth after becoming a spirit. Hearing this, Jessica becomes tense and asks Pedro to elaborate if her sister is in danger or not. That's when Pedro tells Larissa to have a strong desire to live, or else the spirit can take possession of her body and will not leave on easy terms, since evil spirits are looking for someone broken like her to take host of their bodies. Now that Pedro has warned Larissa, she comes back home with Jessica, who announces that she has to board an early flight and get back to work. Larissa wishes her all the best for her work and waves her as she leaves in a taxi. Before going back home, Larissa catches Anne's daughter staring at her from her window, so she storms into Anne's front door and demands that she stop her daughter from staring at her, or else she will take legal action against them. Stunned by Larissa's anger, Anne doesn't talk back and stays still till Larissa leaves, weakened by the bleeding palms. The now pale and weak Anne closes the door and starts worrying about what Larissa has complained about. The worrisome Anne turns off the lights and goes upstairs, where she unlocks her daughter's room while getting flashback. Anne, in her defense, was tired of Isabel's disability and didn't want her to lay her evil eyes on the new neighbors, since she was cursed with an evil spirit because of her father's ritual. In the current time, Isabel's spirit closes the door on Anne and tries to injure her with her wheelchair. But when Anne cries and confesses her love for her, Isabel lets her go. Anne breaks into tears and runs to her car, with a Bible on the passenger seat. In the meantime, Isabel shows up in Larissa's home and causes the entire home to reek. When Larissa inspects the entire house to find out the source of the stench, she comes across Isabel, holding her son's toy in the nursery. The moment Larissa calls 911, Isabel goes back to her room and smirks at Larissa. Noting the situation, she closes every curtain, window, and main door to prevent Isabel from staring into her house. When Matt comes home that night, he finds Larissa aggressively scrubbing everything in the kitchen and complaining of smelling the deceased in the house. Matt becomes paranoid when Larissa turns things around and starts arguing with him when he claims not smelling anything. At that moment, she breaks the news of Anne's daughter breaking into their home, but Matt disputes this, saying Anne's daughter is wheelchair-bound. She slowly starts to lose sense of reality when she tells Matt to peek out their window and see for himself how Anne's daughter keeps peeking into their house. The same night, Isabel's spirit hovers near Larissa's feet until she wakes up, smelling her. Larissa immediately wakes Matt up and forces him to inspect the house. Isabel's spirit hides in the closet, but when Matt opens the closet to take out his gun, Isabel disappears. Now, the couple goes downstairs to check on the door alarms that show no sign of intrusion in the house. But little to Matt's knowledge, Isabel's reflection is shown in the main gate, standing right behind him. When Larissa goes back to her room and looks out of the window, she finds Isabel smirking from her side of the window, which irritates her. The next day, Matt searches Anne's family and finds out that her husband was arrested by the cops after he was caught performing satanic rituals on his paralyzed daughter Isabel. Matt is mortified after reading the articles, but he chooses to move past it and not believe what he has just read. He calls his father and unloads his stress by asking tips on how to stay strong during tough times. In the following scene, Matt and Larissa bury their son and carry out a small funeral, which includes Father Lopez and Matt's dad. The following day, Larissa catches Isabel in her room wearing her wedding dress, so she shoots her with the gun, but since she's a spirit, the bullet hits the mirror while Isabel disappears. When Matt comes home, he becomes petrified to see his wife sitting on the floor with her wedding dress and their gun in her hands. When he shows his support, Larissa opens up about her father also being able to see and hear things that made him look crazy in front of others. She claims that he was mysteriously found lifeless in his car when she was 16, and was told to lie to people that her father succumbed to a heart attack. When she blames her genetics for her unfit mental health, Matt immediately kisses her and tells her she's not insane. Later that night, Larissa goes to the bathroom, and upon returning, she finds Isabel in bed, taking her spot. She starts yelling at her until Matt wakes up. Seeing his wife's deteriorating mental health, Matt visits the doctor alone first thing in the morning. However, when the doctor challenges him to admit Larissa to the psychiatric ward, Matt gives up and calls Jessica for help because he isn't sure if Larissa is mentally ill or if she's being possessed. While Jessica recommends Pedro to him, Isabel haunts Larissa and forces her to overdose on her medicines and perish so that she can take her spot. At Pedro's place, Pedro tells Matt that the evil spirit will not only possess, but permanently take over Larissa's body since she desires to perish, and the spirit will keep provoking her to take her life. He also claims that when Larissa crossed over for a minute, she passed through the gates that separate life from demise, due to which she can freely see spirits while the rest of us cannot. He requests Matt to send Larissa back to that gate so she can choose life and get rid of Isabel. Matt has a hard time processing this, so he runs away. When he goes back home, he finds Larissa overdosed on pills. He makes her puke out the pills, which is observed and hated by Isabel, who is looking at them through her window. When Larissa gains consciousness, she mentions Isabel peeking through the window again, which provokes Matt to prove himself by walking over to Anne's house and standing in front of the window so that Larissa can see there is no one in there. Matt's beliefs are tested when he walks inside Anne's smelly house. He ends up in Isabel's room, where her spirit uses her wheelchair to open the closet, where her body is being kept. He immediately runs back to his house and calls the cops, along with his father. He hugs Larissa and tells her she was right all along, but little does he know, Isabel had already switched bodies with Larissa. Matt thinks everything is going to be fine now that Isabel's body has been found, so he goes outside to talk to cops. He finds out Isabel's mother took her life on the day they moved next door. The detective gives his business card and tells Matt to immediately inform him when Anne shows up. Later that night, while Matt mingles with his wife, Not knowing it is Isabel, Larissa finds herself paralyzed in Isabel's chair. She watches Isabel take her spot and tries to scream. Moments later, Isabel goes near the windows and smiles as she watches Anne visiting Larissa, thinking she's Isabel. When Anne comes closer, she realizes it's not her daughter, so she walks away. In the meantime, Matt looks through the bathroom windows and sees that Anne has arrived, so he immediately calls the detective to update him. The detective replies that he's found Anne's corpse rotting in her car, and by the looks of it, she took. Matt becomes horrified and goes out to see his wife. The ground slips from under his feet when he finds Isabel in front of him. When he looks out of the window, he sees Larissa in a wheelchair in Isabel's room. He tries to run and save his wife, but Isabel throws him back and forth like a ball and stops him from going there. Matt eventually manages to make his way to Larissa, where he chokes her lifeless so she can be brought back to the gate of life and choose life this time. The cops show up and shoot Matt for choking his wife, but the scenes shift back to the operation room where history repeats itself. The doctor tells Matt about his wife being clinically lifeless. Only this time, their baby has survived and is well, whereas Matt remembers nothing and brings Larissa and his boy home. Larissa sees Isabel sitting by the window and recalls everything that happened to her. When Matt asks her what she saw when she perished, she claims to not remember anything, leaving the audience to interpret the ending by themselves. This is where the film ends.